Good evening, all, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening as we talk more about the future of oil drilling and exploration in the Bahamas. Again, a warm welcome to all of our viewers who are watching either from Facebook or YouTube streams. As we are set to begin this evening's discussion, I would like to encourage you to share this stream with your platforms so that many of your friends and family followers can also have the opportunity to view this along with you. I am Rashima Ingram, a Bahamian with a passion for connecting young at heart, and even those who don't feel as young to our oceans. I am also your Executive Director for Waterkeepers Bahamas, a Bahamian environmental organization focused on swimmable, drinkable, and fishable waters, and a member organization of Waterkeeper Alliance. Waterkeeper Alliance is a global advocacy group that's focused on clean water. Waterkeepers Bahamas, along with Bahamas Reef Environmental Education Foundation, Reef, Waterkeeper Alliance, 150 Bahamian and international businesses, environmental groups, and individual supporters comprise the Our Islands, Our Future Coalition. The coalition was established in April 2020, where the focus of the campaign was on petitioning the Prime Minister of Bahamas, Prime Minister Minnis, to cancel all existing oil exploration licenses, reject all proposed renewals, and impose a permanent ban on fossil fuel explorations anywhere within the maritime waters of the Bahamas. Tonight, I am honored to be your moderator. We have a platform of very experienced, very excited speakers who will present on a series of topics for you tonight. Mr. Kieran Smith from One Eleuthera Foundation, Ms. Kazarina McKinney-Lambert from Reef, Mr. Matthew Aubrey from Organization for Responsible Governance, Dr. Ancelino Davis from Science and Perspective, and Mr. Chris Wilkie from the Waterkeeper Alliance Global Advocacy Manager. And so before we begin, I just want to remind you that we do have a petition on change.org, and if you have not already signed that petition, I want to encourage you to do that right now. If you go to www.stopbahamasoildrilling.com, or if you share it on your WhatsApp for your friends and family to also sign that petition, we would really appreciate it. We are nearly there at 100,000 signatures, and we know with your help and support, we can get there. And so I want to bring on our first speaker who will be presenting to you tonight. And he's very excited, and I'm excited about the topic that he has for you, actually. He's going to be talking to you about renewable energies or programs that can be started or implemented, really using the renewable sources of energy that the Bahamas is so rich to have had, which would include our oceans and our sun, and really maximizing on those benefits. And so just to introduce him a little bit, Mr. Kieran Smith, he is from Eleuthera. He spent some time in New Providence at the University of the Bahamas as the campus sustainable coordinator, but he was also in the UK for some time, where he studied governance and public policy at the University of Manchester. At this present moment, Mr. Kieran Smith is the Chief Project Officer of the One Eleuthera Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Smith, who has a wonderful presentation for you. You can share your comments in the chat, and we would be happy to have a discussion on any of those comments. Thank you, Kieran, and welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Rashima, for such a warm welcome. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to be very, I guess, general in the approach, and I hope you enjoy the presentation and welcome any comments. Can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You're good to go.
Oh. Okay, great. So just to give you some insight, just going to talk a little bit about sustainability and the shift to renewable energy as an industry. So just to give you a good overview of our presentation of the outline is, one, just going to talk about the pursuit of fossil fuels, the different types of renewable energy, uh, the shift in renewable energy as an alternative, changes in with the advancement of renewables or challenges, sorry, and also just talking about how OEF is focused on integrating sustainable technologies in our projects, in our programs, and just wrap up really quickly at the end. So in terms of fossil fuels, as you all are very aware, that it's not a sustainable solution to our energy needs going forward. As you know, fossil fuels they become diminished. It will not pretty much continue to satisfy the increase in demand associated with economic development and population increase. We've seen that in 2005, world oil consumption was equal to 85 million of barrels. This represents an average consumption of one Olympic-sized swimming pool every 15 seconds. And so, as our energy demands go up, we recognize that this isn't going to be a sustainable solution for us in the future. Also, when we look at the potential damages to the environment in the pursuit of oil, for an example, there's many threats to our coast, our wildlife. It impacts climate change. It also impacts one of the major economic engines of the country, which is tourism product. And so we got to be very careful about the potential damages and the impact it's going to have on our local economy. Fossil fuels, they continue to dominate the energy consumption. They continue to dominate the market at this time. But what we're seeing is there is a shift towards more renewable energy. The case for renewables to replace fossil energies in the atmosphere has received a lot of attention. Governments, international organizations are now putting more resources, a little bit more emphasis, creating policies in place to create that infrastructure for renewable energy. So renewable energy, also known as clean energy, it comes from natural sources. And just to give you some quick types of renewable energy sources, you have solar, you have wind energy, you have the geothermal aspect, and also water energy as well. And just to touch on the shift, what you're seeing is nearly 335,000. This is statistics that I found interesting. Work in the solar industry, and more than 111,000 work in the wind industry, compared to 211,000 working in coal mining or fossil fuel extraction. Clean energy employment, it's grown to 3.6% in 2018. Sorry, so it's added a new jobs at 110,000 in the States. 4.2% of all these jobs were added nationally, and employers expect 6% job growth. The International Energy Agency, they highlighted that new wind and solar projects in China, in Europe, and the US has increased their capacity by some 45%. When we look at the Bahamas, there's a lot of shift towards renewable energy. We have the IDB, who has started pretty much the initial investment of $80 million in credit line and for investment in renewable energy in the Bahamas. We also have the Family Island Solarization project that started. And so, I mean, globally, internationally, looking at these different organizations, there is this push for more renewable energy. I've provided a video just to show you how some of the jobs are growing globally, and just looking futuristically at this renewable energy as a means of new industry for the future. So just share my screen. Can you hear my video? Can you see can you hear me? So that was just a quick video, but you've also seen this trend where more women are also getting involved in the renewable energy sector. And so it's also starting to bring balance in terms of gender roles in the sector. And so I just also want to talk a little bit about the benefits. So with the benefits of renewable energy, we see that we will have a healthier, a cleaner world to live in. Currently, those persons who live in urban areas, they suffer in some instances, are likely to suffer respiratory issues from subpar air quality. And these alternative energy sources will help to improve, could help to improve that significantly. Uh, there is room for more local jobs in this sector as the sector starts to become more viable as we start to expand in that area. Also looking at it, whether people, they consider or they believe that global warming is real or not, there's no denying or there's no denying that fossil fuels will continue to become more scarce. And as they become more scarce, they're going to become more expensive. And alternative energy can be a way of supplementing that supply for electricity and energy and so forth. So alternative energy, it's going to become more cost effective. We've seen that tremendously over the last few years, where there's been more reductions in duty rates, concessions on VAT in some instances to bring in this renewable energy or equipment to produce renewable energy. So there's policies that are shifting or providing those concessions needed to make uh, these alternative sources of energy more affordable. And then the other benefit is renewable energy is one of the world's fastest growing energy sources, now increasing by 2.5% each year, and it has not been sufficient to keep pace with the consequences of the growing demands in some instances. But as we see the benefits of moving in that direction, we see that the world is shifting in that direction. The question is, do you want to really drill and even in the event that oil is found, when the world is shifting and changing its infrastructure for renewable energy, do you really want to still be in that arena of oil when the world has already shifted to something else? And so challenges with the advancement of renewable energy, as you're aware, the cost there is a major challenge in terms of startup costs. Sometimes it could be significant. It could cost you a lot of money up front. Significant reserves of fossil fuels still impact, given the relevant attention needed to renewables. In terms of subsidies around the world globally, you see that fossil fuels receive 6 times more in subsidies than renewable energy. But also, our infrastructure is designed for fossil fuels. And so now we have to pretty much change our internal infrastructure to accommodate renewable energy. And then you also have that businesses will have to change their modus operandi, meaning that they will have to change the way business is being done. Some businesses will continue or will want to rely on fossil fuels, on oil. But what you will see is as more jobs become available in renewable energy, you're likely to see that there will be a possible decline in jobs for fossil fuels and its production and that industry as a whole. So those are some of the challenges. Just to touch on OEF incorporation of alternative energy sources. Uh, we were founded on the shared vision for Eleuthera. We focus on the environment, we focus on culture, we focus on health, we focus on the economy, we focus on education. And while it is broad, it does speak to a lot of the issues that we face on Eleuthera. And as we develop as an organization, as you know, we're a community development organization, we are focusing on a sustainable campus. So right now we do have a 50-acre campus where we're focusing on making that a sustainable campus. So I'm just going to share with you some quick pictures and photos of some of our buildings, some of our programs, and share with you an upcoming studio project that we hope to achieve in the next few years. But what you see on the left is our RO system for the farm. We do have a farm that a 23-acre farm. We pretty much have a solar system on that system that provides water to our crops, our plants. Our farm, pretty much the 2 acres that we're currently farming on, we have a solar system in place that pretty much provides the energy needed to run our hydroponic system. What you see over here is on this building is our tea room. And what we do is that supplies the energy needed for us to run the tea room. The tea room is pretty much a restaurant on campus that we have that helps to facilitate our training hotel, as well as supporting persons in the local community as well. And so what you see here is the installation of when that was taking place. And this is how it looked when it was finished. And so I just want to end on our upcoming studio project. It is focused on creating an affordable housing model for persons in Eleuthera. It's something we've partnered with UB, with University of North Carolina, Charlotte, partnership.
Since 2012, One Luther Foundation has been on a mission to empower local
Florida A&M University. And what they're doing is they're designing a studio concept of an affordable home that could be built at a reasonable price. The goal, the aim is within $70,000, and it's focused on incorporating sustainable technologies, so the rainwater catchment system, solar, and so we have students that's pretty much created designs of 5 different concepts of how this could possibly work. So we're still fleshing out the concept, but I'll be happy to share this video with you just to give you a little bit of a insight of what this project would entail. So let me just play this video, and then I would wrap up with my conclusion.
Island communities by developing resources. In 2012, One Luther Foundation has been on a mission. Since 2012, One Luther Foundation has been on a mission to empower local island communities by developing resources in the areas of economy, education, environment, health, and heritage. With post-colonial social disparities and high cost of living, 1 in 4 Bahamian families live at the poverty line. Expensive building practices affect our ability to afford safe and resilient homes, making families more vulnerable to climate change. As many Bahamians are unable to get title to generation land, our ability to access our rightful equity prevents many from building homes and wealth. Most Airbnbs and resorts are foreign owned. There's a need to bring local ownership to tourism and develop small resorts that preserve our unique heritage and cultural identity. We seek to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty, which disproportionately affects Black communities within the Bahamas. Enter the Studio for Affordable and Sustainable Housing, a revolutionary and scalable housing project. The studio engages university students, sector-specific professionals, and community members to conceptualize affordable, innovative, and resilient homes financed by local banking partners that can also be used for vacation rentals or small resorts, creating a viable source of income. Bahamians will have access to affordable, resilient housing and empowering opportunities to own their economy and to create and transfer wealth across generations.
So I'm just gonna end there and just wrap up my presentation. And I hope that the video just gave you a little bit of insights on how we're trying to incorporate sustainable technologies into this affordable housing project that we're working on. But I think as we see the world is moving in a different direction in terms of renewable energy, I think it's important as a country that we continue to move in that direction. And we do see the benefits of some of this sustainable technology. And as we grow as a country, as we move forward towards renewable energy, I do personally believe that the pursuit of oil drilling isn't the best way forward for the country. So I'll end there, Rashima, and I'll turn that back over to you.
What a wonderful way to really get this conversation going. And just so that everyone who's probably just joining in with us knows what's happening, we have Mr. Kieran Smith. He was just presenting as a representative for the One Eleuthera Foundation. And we are here talking about the future of the Bahamas, as well as the future of oil drilling in the Bahamas. And Kieran was giving us a wonderful update on some of the projects that One Eleuthera has already been able to establish, and then some of the projects that they have in the pipeline. The last video that he showed was one of the projects that they are working towards. And so, Kieran, I just wanted to share a comment that was sent by Ms. Deborah Deal, and it's a very good one. I know she is a very strong advocate on renewable energy, so you definitely should know where she's going with this comment. But it seems to be that Eleuthera, the entire island of Eleuthera, really is like a little bit ahead of the rest of the islands of the Bahamas in terms of really understanding sustainability and renewable energies, and really building that into the whole model of being able to live and to build businesses and careers around renewable energies and everything about nature. I just love Eleuthera for that. But if you are able to share your thoughts, especially because you were the sustainability coordinator on the campus of the University of the Bahamas, just really what you can share on her comments.
Sorry, what was that comment?
Well, she said at this point, most businesses have to have their own generators as power, and it's not consistent with the add-on or the additional costs in running a business, and having to have customers put back those costs. Well, I guess increasing their fees and passing that on to the customers, therefore doubling the cost. So what are some of the things that you or One Eleuthera has really been able to do to kind of reduce cost or to reduce your overhead, really?
Well, to answer that question, I still think what we have is a work in progress. I think what we're seeing, I think we've reduced our cost implementing that solar system on our roof for the farm, which is a new addition that's actually in partnership with the Jeff Small Grants Program. But I do think, given the situation on the island, I think she raised a really good point. I'm familiar with her. I think she raised a good point about the cost. I mean, given the current circumstances, it's not reliable now in terms of what we get in terms of electricity. So even in the sense of having that alternative option, that solar energy on campus, when power, it cuts off, you still have that additional energy that you can rely on, that we tap into, and I would say that it has reduced cost for electricity, especially dealing with the farm, the hydroponic system. But I think as we develop the campus, as we try to take on more of the sustainable technology, we'll probably see more a drastic impact in terms of energy efficiency and cost.
And where would persons who are interested in the work that One Eleuthera is doing be able to find more information so that they can either reach you or just stay abreast on some of the projects that you have going?
Well, they could reach me at Kieran Smith at oneeleuthera.org. So it's KEYRON Smith at oneeleuthera.org. I'll be happy to share my contacts as well. In terms of phone contact, I do have a contact. I'll give it to you. It's 82. If you want to reach out, it's 821.
Say that again for us.
821-2622.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kieran. And That was very good. I just wanted to let everybody know who's probably joining us for the first time know that we are talking about the future of oil drilling in the Bahamas. And so Kiran just presented on some of the work that One Eleuthera has been doing, and just giving you an alternative. And so that's what the Our Islands, Our Future campaign has really been focusing on, alternatives rather than the fossil fuel way of doing things, really looking at what we have here in the Bahamas in terms of resources, as well as what's at risk. And so I wanted to just let people know who may not know what we have been doing with the Our Islands, Our Future campaign, know that we actually did an economic study in August 2020. And one of the interesting things that we were able to have returned to us in that study was to really look at the numbers. And so the numbers really speak for itself, where you have over 100,000 Bahamians who would be affected by an oil spill that would happen in our waters. And so these Bahamians are employed either directly or indirectly in the commercial fisheries and aquaculture industries. They're researchers or scientists, they're filmmakers or television persons, as well as you would imagine those who are in the tourism industry, which would include those lodges, those fishing lodges, services, recreational fishing, and some other industries. And if you look at the dollar value of what's really at risk, you're looking at almost $8 billion a year that can be affected by any oil spill that may be happening in our waters, because we were looking at the possibility of oil exploration in the Bahamas. And we do know that the Bahamas Petroleum Company had conducted an exploratory well in December, and they ended that in early February of this year. And at that point, they weren't able to find any commercial volumes of oil in the Bahamas. And so what they are intending on doing now is really moving away from any exploration in the Bahamas and moving further south in the Caribbean. But we do know that our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean really depend a lot too on the same industries that we depend on, which would be tourism and fishing. And so we really need to, as a Caribbean state, really need to lock and interlock our strengths and really speak on behalf of each other, and really petition all of our governments really to consider putting a permanent ban on oil drilling in Caribbean waters, as well as the waters of the Bahamas, which is the Atlantic Ocean. And so for those of you who may not have signed our petition, I'm asking you to do so right now. We're almost at 100,000 signed petitioners. It's www.stopbahamasoildrilling.com. And moving on to our next speaker, we have the wonderful, and everybody really knows who he is, because he's really been really the force for behind all of the groups really that were really asking for the implementation of the Freedom of Information Act, Mr. Matt Aubrey. He is the executive director of the Organization for Responsible Governance. He has a master's in social work, and he has worked in the nonprofit sector in the Bahamas on social justice for over 30 years. And so I want to bring Mr. Matt Aubrey to the studio and on stage. And Matt, I really want to say to you publicly, thank you for all the work that you've been doing with this. Also, thank you for really supporting the Our Islands, Our Future Coalition. And I look forward to a great presentation from you.
Thank you. No pressure. I'm not sure that I qualify as wonderful, but I'll take the compliment at this stage. And I want to thank everyone for inviting me to be here, and really recognize the tremendous work and leadership that is happening in the environmental section with Our Islands, Our Future, and all the leaders that go within that. I think that there's been a significant increase in the presence and the value and the impact of civil society in the last number of years, and to be able to put together 100,000 folks that believe that protecting that space is critical to the Bahamas is quite significant. You know, even if it's not recognized by our formal powers yet. So just two things as a background. We're obviously there's a tremendous amount of effort to try and protect the natural spaces in the Bahamas to make sure that our natural resources can exist for our children and their children's children, and every stop is being pulled out to fight these things, you know, to work on. You have petitions and you have great scientific efforts, and we'll hear tremendous presentations going forward. But one of the tools that also can help is information. And so they've asked me to speak a little bit about freedom of information. So I may officially be the most boring topic on tonight's docket, but I think there are some things that are worth looking at, and I will point those out. I also do want to recognize, though, that when the Freedom of Information Act was passed, and I'll talk about that process, it was a reflection of not the leadership of myself by any means, or one organization like the Organization for Responsible Governance, but it was a coalition of folks who put all of their time and all of their effort. And so the work that you're doing is following in a precedent of success. And I think that is important, that as we go through these things, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. There's going to be times that it does not seem that our efforts are bringing impact, but it's a long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So I do want folks to feel encouraged in that way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about freedom of information. It's very timely in that we had some exciting information, exciting announcement related to freedom of information here in the Bahamas, and I'll go through that. But also just to equate ourselves, because this is a tool that can be used to bolster the efforts of groups like yours in doing the work that you do. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hope that this works. Let's see, yes, and picking a window, here we go. Okay, are you able to see that?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So freedom of information, which is often referred to as by the acronym FOIA, just a quick brief about what it is. So a FOIA is a law here in the Bahamas, a 2017 law that grants the public access to information that the government holds and uses to make policy decisions in its day-to-day. Fundamentally, it's a right to information. It's a right that every citizen of the Bahamas and those that are associated with the Bahamas has. It recognizes that government is a reflection of the public will, and that the government information and resources are ultimately to be used by the citizenry for their purposes. And what we see is that it can also provide countries with a platform that builds our transparency, it strengthens our democracy, it helps to combat corruption, and there's also some other beneficial things, like it increases economic development. But it also becomes a resource that activists and advocates can use. Across the world, 120 countries have right to information laws, so it's good to know that this is a very widely respected law. It's not always as effective in every jurisdiction, and there's even associations that rate the effectiveness of their laws, and I'll talk just briefly about that a little later. But it's used often by media, by academia, by activists and businesses. What we do see, though, is that you could have the best law on the books, and if it's not used or enforced, it doesn't mean much. And so the whole point of trying to educate folks and educate you about what FOIA is also importantly to equate you with something that you can use in your efforts. And the more we use it, the stronger it gets. So what is it not? So it's not an open door. We're not there yet. There's two kinds of transparency. There's active transparency and there's passive transparency. Active transparency is when government discloses information. We see here that there have been more steps towards this in the Bahamas, where you'll see more financial information around budget time that's being shared. Those are all points where the information is just being provided, and that's obviously the ideal. But as a developmental step, passive transparency is where it's demand driven. And so this is demand driven, right? So it also requires that we go out and find it, ask for it, and be specific about what we're asking for. So it's important to know that not everything is open to public access, and it tries to have a balance between the public's right to access as well as the interest of the nation in keeping certain information confidential. And as you can imagine, that's a very tough line to hold, and one that I think here in the Bahamas we almost assume is going to be taken advantage of by government. Some of the exemptions that we do have here are records that would contain confidential information between the Bahamas and a foreign government, and that's an important distinction because there are environmental discussions that happen between our country and others. Records for which disclosure might prejudice Bahamian security or defense. Law enforcement records. This is not where you get personal information, so your personal information is protected. Just be assured of that. There's also some legally privileged documents or records that may significantly affect the national economy. Records that show cabinet deliberations. That's still an area where it's deemed to be secret. Records revealing commercial trade secrets or ones that might be detrimental. So, for example, records around the breeding grounds of the Nassau grouper, or something that might protect a particular natural area that, if known, might cause it to be exploited. And then, as I said, nothing containing sensitive personal information. Some records you might be able to get, you can only get them in part. So there might be portions that would be redacted or deleted. And others, there is also a statutory provision, so that after 30 years have passed, the Act states that many of these records that are considered exempt now will not be exempt. So there's also a portion of time where that information comes up. And just as a reference, when we did advocate that we thought, civil society advocated that we thought 15 years was more appropriate. But when you look across the world, 30 years is by no means egregious. It is within a stretch. And as reference, I think within the U.S., their Freedom of Information Act, the exemptions are 50 years. They have a much longer history, but this is something that we look at. So who can request information? If you're a Bahamian citizen, if you're a permanent resident, if you're incorporated or registered business, partnerships or unincorporated associations, other folks who maintain businesses, office or branches in the Bahamas, they may request the records. It's also important to know that you do not need to give a reason as to why you are asking for a record. So it is your right, and whatever you request has to be received as that request. You don't have to be qualified. So why does it matter? I think it's important. It's freedom of information strengthens democracies. It creates more effective and efficient government, and it creates economic growth. In instances where we see coming out of the economic downslide that we've had from COVID, you see governments that are pushing forward more government contracts, more procurement from government as a way of investing in infrastructure. Well, getting more information and having them available can also make local vendors more competitive in terms of trying to reach out for those. So there are some upsides to freedom of information that are not strictly about accountability and transparency, but particularly for our efforts here today, I think it's important to recognize that it creates an opportunity for advocates and activists like yourselves to drive transparency, to gather information, to push for government accountability and improved policy making. And that's really what I think grounds it in our efforts with Oregon and with the 22 organizations that fought for the passage of it. So how does it work? You make a direct application to the government that holds that record. So if you're looking from Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, or if you need something from Ministry of Works, or something that's directly held by the Registrar General, your application, based on our legislation, has to be in writing. It has to be addressed to the information manager. So every department of government is to have an information manager who is trained to receive and respond to these requests. And you need to be able to provide enough information about the record to allow the government to identify it. Ultimately, government has 30 days to respond. They can deem that maybe they are not the appropriate holder of that information and then pass you on to another government agency, which also has another 30 days to respond. So that's why you want to be as specific and as well researched as possible when you make your requests. But if government denies the information, you can make an appeal to that direct information manager, but you also can bring it to the information commissioner. And the information commissioner is a critical role to this law. It is an independent entity who is to really adjudicate over whether the law is being applied appropriately throughout government. They record and track all the requests, and when a request is denied, they have the mandate to be able to oversee ensuring that it is valid, and they are really looking out at an objective standpoint to interpret it based on that balance between the public's right to access and the public interest of not disclosing that information. We're excited because there was a information commissioner just appointed here in the Bahamas after a number of years since the law was enacted. And that means that there's an opportunity to move forward. But a lot of the act will have to be put in place once the information commissioner is fully in place. We talked a little bit about the fact that this is something that is across the world. So 120 countries have a right to access laws. Trinidad and Tobago, not Trinidad and Obago, forgive my typo, passed their FOIA in 1999. Jamaica passed a FOIA in 2007. But it is notable that enactment of FOIAs in the Caribbean generally are delayed. So Bermuda took 5 years to enact their law. Grenada passed in 2007. It's still not enacted. And although there was a bill in St. Lucia, it was never made into law even to date. So what we've gone through here in the Bahamas for our delay is not out of the realm of possibility, and not even the most extreme of that, which I share more to understand the process, not to placate or say we shouldn't continue to push for enactment as soon as possible. In the Bahamas, and forgive the small type, but we passed a first Freedom of Information Act in 2012. But it was not enacted because another administration came in and did not pass that legislation. Forgive me if you can hear my son singing. We then that administration then took on consultation in 2015 and 2016, led by groups like Save the Bays and Citizens for Better Bahamas. A number of civil society groups had really started to speak out and mobilize and call for this. And we, the Organization for Responsible Governance, and a number of other groups joined them to make a coalition of 22 different civil society and private sector groups like the Chamber and Reef and wonderfully powerful groups like Rabble were out there. And we ultimately, when we looked at it, looked at a collective membership of 50,000 folks. So when we looked at all of our tasks, so that was a number that we thought was significant at the time. Your 100,000 folks on your petition is even more notable. We had 2 major town halls. We put together consolidated recommendations. We achieved significant media. And We March at the time adopted FOIA as a top priority. And so those marches and those efforts also promoted FOIA. We had some traction, and ultimately the bill came to debate in 2017. When it was debated, what was interesting, and I think has relevance to the work you're doing now, is the NGOs were attacked as trying to use the act to destabilize the country in the debate. I think there were two ministers spoke out against it. There was a significant letter writing campaign where we had thousands of letters that were submitted to the MPs, and the reaction in Parliament was that these letter writings were coordinated as false. Everyone had an individual email. Everybody had signed up to send these letters. But again, so I think it speaks to also the culture change that is going to be required, even with the law enacted, and the culture change that has to happen related to civil society and private sector as a social force. And so the resistance that we're seeing now with some of the environmental efforts, I think is an indicative component of something that we're all going to have to continue to work on. The act was passed in 2017, and we did have an impact. A number of things that we had advocated were part of the law. We removed the ministerial veto. We narrowed the scope of exemptions. There were a lot more exemptions in the bill versus the act. We had guidance on the definition of the public interest and the accompanying regulations. That still is something that we need to see more specifically and how that's going to be fleshed out. So that's an important thing to be aware of when you're looking at the papers or following this issue. We did expand the class of accessible documents to include some policy documents. And we boosted the independence of the Information Commissioner. We wanted to make sure that that role was as independent as possible. But to date, only 3 parts of the bill remain enacted, 2017 to 2021. Now, a few things have happened, obviously, hurricanes and COVID, but we are feeling that this movement doesn't indicate the true potential of what can and should be happening. First, the previous act was recalled. There was the enactment of the appointment of Information Commissioner, which was critical to moving forward a lot of the other parts of the regulations rather, and there was a whistleblowers protection that was enacted, which is good in theory, but the practical components of how you would really protect a whistleblower, how that information is going to be received, a hotline where information could be brought forward, these things still are not in place. So again, great law, no enforcement or ability to act doesn't really translate to the intent, which is to provide a safe space for folks to be able to bring forward information that the public should have the right to. Dr. Lisa Benjamin, who is led the consultation committee in 2016, was a lecturer at UB and a strong environmentalist here in the Bahamas, did some research on the process so that folks could learn from what the Bahamas went through. And she also looked across the Caribbean, and she said there's a lot of there are problems with implementation. It's a lack of public awareness and insufficient training of public, and there's also procedure and financial limitations within government. So she had some recommendations, and I think that's important to know, is that this is not going to be an easy process no matter what. So within those recommendations, she saw non-political engagement by civil society being a critical step, having us and non-governmental reinforce the need that this is really about the user. It's about who needs to get that information, not the government's right to protect information is going to be important. That there's a fair and independent Information Commissioner. That's important for not only for the optics, so that we can believe it matters and encourage folks to use this right, but also in how we implement, someone that can oversee it from an objective standpoint. And that there's going to be a lot of training and improvement of public records management before the act really can come into effect in order to be a better system, which really speaks to we have to start this off right. So I think there's a real interest in getting this going and getting the office open. What we've heard is that the government says it may take 3 to 6 months for an office to become open, and that could be a realistic expectation as long as the right things are done within that time. So we're advocating a lot around that. So then this is really the payoff. We're moving into a space with oil drilling and mining here in a little different level, where we're now moving into the extractive industries. And this is by no means something unique to the Caribbean. You see it in many Caribbean spaces. Trinidad and Tobago have a lot of information on this. But what we see is that transparency is critical. Absolutely critical as we move forward into these industries. There's too much that can happen that if it's kept between the private industry that is driving the extractive industries forward in a jurisdiction and government, a lot bad can happen. There's numbers of precedents that we can speak to, and if there's any interest, folks can ask and I'll speak to them more. But there was a piece of research that I found that I thought was really interesting and relevant. And it talked about the fact that just having access is not enough. So having a freedom of information bill will not necessarily be enough to really protect and make sure that bad things don't happen. It talked about the importance of civic awareness campaigns and economic empowerment. And these two things, changing the culture, changing our mindset about what we need to know about the importance of citizens' role in governance and the benefit that more folks can have is important, because it drives folks to want to be more involved, speak out to government, and ensure that accountability happens. So the citizenry's public interest values do matter, and I think here in the Bahamas, this culture that we need to have, we not only have to change our culture related to information and embracing transparency, but I think we also have to think about our role regarding citizen activity. That our involvement at all levels is critical. Our attentiveness to the pollution in our own neighborhoods, I think COVID has shown, our understanding of our impact against each other is critical. And so without that values, holding the government's accountability is less effective, or ultimately meaningless, because it's a small group of folks that are speaking out, not necessarily the larger group. And government knows that it's the larger group that matters when you get into the voting booths, right? So it's not just about information, it's about groups. So the work that this group is doing and the environmental groups are doing is critical, because it's their catalyst, they're lighting the fires that will make a difference. So you want to get involved and support and join these types of groups, because that makes a major difference. Not just accessing information, but doing something with it. It also showed that when information on corrupt extractive governance, which is really, again, not paying attention to the interest of the country related to the profit of an industry, when it's paired with citizens' high levels of economic vulnerability and illiteracy, the presence of a dominant political party with structures that go through all of our state and non-state institutions, an institutional culture of submissiveness or apathy, and weak CSO capacity to mobilize citizens, then it's very unlikely that government will do anything to demand, citizens will do anything to demand accountability of government, or that government will work towards that end. So when I read about that, and Mozambique is a very different context than the Bahamas, but it definitely makes me feel like there are lessons there for us, because there are a lot of those points that ring true here in the Bahamas. So I'm going to skip through this actually, but I want to get towards this, which is critical. So when we think about the importance of a Freedom of Information Act, we link it to our sustainability. So not only does it help our accountability and our transparency, it helps us in crafting better policy and government decision making and driving better spending. And it ultimately leads to more inclusive and participatory governance. So that really means that the interests that you as the citizens, you as the private sector, you as civil society have can be better considered. I think too often we've been wrapping at a very thick skin to try and get attention, and we need to use this as a potential tool to change the culture, a culture where the power falls back onto the people's side, so that the interest and drivers of policy come from the communities, not from the halls of government. So here in the Bahamas, what we see is that civil society has played a crucial role. It's whether it be helping folks out of the despair of hurricanes and move towards recovery, driving our rights for our marginalized groups like folks with disabilities, and fighting for gender rights, working to feed those that are in the middle of crisis currently, but also ultimately driving the protection of our environment and the conservation of our resources, and working towards fighting the effects of climate change. It is that line that I think is so important, because it's long-standing. The Organization for Responsible Governance, we're not the group that's fighting for the issue of the day. Our feeling is that once we see things in the newspaper, we've probably made a mistake. And what we want to do is work towards how do we get in front of that and make sure we don't make any further mistakes. Well, the work that's being done here, to me, really rings with that point. You're fighting some immediate circumstances, but you're also pointing very much to what is the long term, and how do we make sure that the Bahamas has a sustainable future. So as the government looks to accelerate foreign direct investments, it's important that there are mechanisms to independently determine and monitor what these impacts and risks are with the large-scale developments. No matter how glossy the name of the company may be, it's only in the hands of those that are going to be most impacted, the citizens, civil society, local private sector, that we need to have a better gauge of, is this the right thing? Is it going to make a difference? And in order to do that, they need access to all the information. So that's an important component of it. So we know that these groups, they need access to data and environmental assessments. They need to fully understand and evaluate how these projects are going to affect our natural spaces and our resources, and also the welfare of those communities associated to those resources. So I'm very glad to be able to present, and the Organization for Responsible Governance will continue to do our part, and I'm really looking forward to hearing my fellow colleagues and what they will share. So thank you for this opportunity, and have a great night.
Wonderful. Thanks again so much, Matt. I just wanted to post this interesting note that Mallory had, and she said, yes, we need more accountability for impacts to fragile ecosystems and marine resources, be it from unsustainable coastal development or oil drilling. And so, yeah, definitely we needed to start off this conversation with presentations by Kieran and yourself, so that the viewers have an understanding of what is out there and the tools that we would be able to use as we talk further about oil drilling in the Bahamas. So definitely thanks.
Our tagline is get informed and get involved, and I think that applies here. We're driving a campaign called the Year of the Active Citizen, because we recognize that nothing's going to change at least until all of us recognize that we do have some power. I think we live in a space sometimes where we feel a little disempowered, but it's our micro actions that can make a difference. So we encourage folks to do a little bit every day, and being a part of this forum is definitely one of those major steps forward.
Thank you again. Thanks so much, Matt. And I'll talk with you a little bit more backstage, but don't leave us.
Great.
And there was also another comment that I wanted to just touch over quickly from Jim. And I just want to remind persons who may not be aware that a lot of the legislation is online. And so if you go to laws.bahamas.gov.bs, you would be able to find the Freedom of Information Act, Jim. So please have a look at that. I wanted persons to know about some of the work that Our Islands, Our Future has been doing. Like I said, the coalition was implemented or established in April 2020. But we have written so many letters, and it's so funny that Matt talked about it, that it was a letter writing expedition, even with Freedom of Information, letter writing by Save the Bays, by Re-Earth, by Rabble, by Org, by Transparency International. There were so many groups that were writing letters. And it wasn't different for Our Islands, Our Future either. We wrote to the Prime Minister, we wrote to the Minister of Tourism, we wrote to the Minister of Marine Resources, we wrote to the Minister responsible for Legal Affairs and the Attorney General, Mr. QC Carl Bethel. There were so many letters that we wrote. And in January and March of this year, we wrote to the Attorney General twice, because there was, at that time, no information commissioner with responsibility for the freedom of information who was present at the time, who we can direct our request to. We wrote to the Attorney General asking for very specific information related to oil drilling in the Bahamas and related to the existing licenses that were present at the time. And so now that we have a information commissioner and a deputy in the name of retired Chief Justice Keith Thompson, and the former Assistant Director for Legal Affairs, Mr. Shane Miller, we definitely should know who we are writing to. There's an actual person that we can write our letters to. But we're hoping to get more than that. We're hoping to get answers. We're hoping to get access. And records around breeding grounds for the Nassau group. I know the next speaker will be so happy to have heard Matt talk about that, because it has been a discussion that's been happening, right? Where even information like this is so hard to get, and we need to have this information in order to talk more, to present more for our research projects that we're doing. There's so much information that needs to be deposited and accessed for the people to really be able to function. And so moving right into that, I want to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. Anselino Davis, a Bahamian, a conservationist with over 20 years of experience. He's a part of the Bahamas National Oil Spill Response Team, and he has been a part of that team even during the Deepwater Horizon spill. And he has directly surveyed the marine and terrestrial environments on Quesal Bank, Andros, and the Berry Islands. So he definitely knows what he's going to be talking about as he talks about the future of oil drilling in the Bahamas. Welcome, Dr. Anselino Davis.
Thank you very much, Rashima. And so for everyone that's just tuning in, I want to give you a little background of myself, of what makes me qualified to speak on this issue, and then talk about how I see the issue of oil exploration and drilling in the Bahamas, both socially, economically, environmentally, and how we're really not prepared for it at all. So I am Dr. Anselino Davis. I have my doctorate in ecology, but coming up, I sat on the National Biodiversity Subcommittee, so protecting all of our wildlife. I was a part of the National Oil Spill Response Task Force for the Deepwater Horizon. I was not contacted when there was the oil spill at Equinor in Grand Bahama, and I don't think anyone else that was trained during that time was contacted either, unless they are still in government. I also sit on the National Wildlife Conservation and Trade Advisory Committee. I was on the National Coastal Awareness Committee, and I chair the Technical Committee to develop standards for environmental protection and management. So with all of these things, it gives me a kind of well-rounded view on the environment and issues related to the environment. And I deliver a lot of this content through science and perspective on social media. And I've reviewed some of these laws in videos on my channel on YouTube, as well as on Facebook. But I think one of the important things is that I'm not tied to any political party, any government agency, or even a local nonprofit institution. So I could pretty much say whatever comes out of my mouth. My family's also from Andros, so I am acutely aware of how that community can be affected, and I'm paying attention. So in my experience, the first time that I went to the Quesal Bank was because there was an oil spill in the Gulf, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which covered 1,300 miles of coastline in the US. And this is after they mobilized 47,000 people. So imagine if 1 out of every 10 Bahamians left to go and fight an oil spill. They had 7,000 boats and vessels that went to help do that. And they still didn't stop it. 1,300 miles of coastline. The entirety of Andros is only about 100 and something miles. So that means you could actually coat Andros, 10 times over. That's a big risk. And when I went to Quesal Bank that first time, we had to drive from New Providence all the way up and around Andros to get over there to survey that area, because we didn't even know what we had. And you know what? We still don't know how much we have over there. But there's a lot of good data out since then, including the Nature Conservancy having mapped throughout the Caribbean. And it shows that we have millions of acres of really good lobster and conch habitat. Nassau groupers can be out there. We have corals, we have bonefish, sharks, all of these things. If you're from Andros, we have crabs, land crabs. But when we went out there, we didn't know what we had. We had to go and study that. And the most beautiful areas that you could ever see are on the Quesal Bank. And that's why I go so hard for it. So that was in 2010. And I went out there, I saw all this beauty that we had, but we didn't get any oil. But we invested a lot to go out there and see that. And we were thinking that if the oil did touch the Bahamas, we would be able to use that data to fight for our rights to be reimbursed in our country from a foreign country and a foreign company to recover our losses and our damages. Now, the next year, I actually wrote a letter to the Living Oceans Foundation so that they could start the global reef expedition in the Bahamas. And you know what? You look down at the Bahamas from space, it's the most beautiful place in the world. And of course, they started the global reef expedition in the Bahamas, but it was so difficult to find Bahamians that were qualified in these survey techniques and that could actually go out and do it. And we still have that problem. We do not have the Bahamians who are able to quantify and assess that area or that habitat in the numbers that we need so that if we had an oil spill, we'd be able to recoup some of the costs. And you know what? Quite frankly, there's no place in the world that has had an oil spill and has been able to recoup the cost, not only of the lost environmental resources, but the lost lives, the livelihoods, the future lost opportunities. We do not have that capacity. Venetia Hargreaves Allen actually conducted research on the economic value of Andros's natural resources. They were valued at $142 million in direct revenues each year. Now, Andros only has 7,500 people on it, so that's like $19,000 per Androsian per year. And of that, $70 million stems from commercial fishing and $44 million from nature-based tourism alone. So why would you risk all of that? Earlier last year, I believe it was, Carl Bethel said they could possibly, if they renegotiate the BPC contract to get more money from them, they would possibly be able to make an annuity that could give every Bahamian $50 a month. Yay, $50 a month. That's $600 a year. Why would you trade $600 a year for $19,000 a year? And not only trading, really making a garbage trade on the money, but you lose conch, lobster, all the fisheries, tourism, the crab. And crab isn't just about crab, it's about our culture. Bahamians go crabbing. That's what you're getting for Father's Day. You're getting some crab and rice. Imagine losing that so that some people who own shares in BPC and live in Britain could make money off of your backs. That's dumb. That's Joneserish. For those of you that are watching from outside the Bahamas, Joneserish means that you really, really want something badly and you ruin everything else to get it. So imagine trading that and losing all of that stuff on this risk. And BPC is a risky company. Oil drilling is risky. The Exxon Valdez in 1989 in Prince William Sound, Alaska, spilled only 11 million gallons. And that was the worst oil spill in US history in terms of environmental damage. And it's only second to the Deepwater Horizon. And the Exxon Valdez oil spill, it still has oil in their soil, in their sand, all along their beaches, 32 years later. Can you imagine? I went from primary school through my doctorate and they still haven't cleaned that up? 32 years. Who is going to pay Androsians for all the crab they will not eat for 32 years? Who is going to pay you for all the tours that you could have taken out to the west side of Andros for 32 years? Who is going to pay the BNT staff to be out in the bush and the mangroves and the flats of the Andros West Side National Park for 32 years cleaning up oil? Nobody. Definitely not BPC, because they don't even have the money to pay their licenses, right? And I will go hard for the Bahamas, for Andros, for the Key Sal Bank every time. But it's not just that area. In BPC's EIA, they said the entire Bahamas is at risk in the event of a spill, because they know that we will all be impacted by the impacts on the tourism industry and the fisheries industry. As a Marine Stewardship Council certified fishery, lobster in the Bahamas might not make it to any of those markets that we use now if we have an oil spill in our country. Our visitors that come to the Bahamas, they don't know the difference between Andros West Side, Key Sal Bank, and Acklands or Bimini. They just know there's an oil spill in the Bahamas, and you will not see any of that tourist money for the next 3, maybe 5 years, because they know the beaches are covered in oil. The island is covered in oil, right? And if you work in the tourism industry and you've been paying attention, you know that's what happens. Overall, we are not ready. We can't take that risk. We've already had Dorian. We're going through COVID now. Things come in threes, and I don't want to be dealing with an oil spill this year or next year or any time in my lifetime. And in particular, we're not ready in terms of capacity and the supplies that we need. You look at the young men that are in the forest in Grand Bahama right now, cleaning up after the Equinor oil spill. They don't even have on personal protective equipment. I was just there, and they are not covering themselves properly. They're picking up used oil with their hands and with gloves that are not appropriate to the work. They don't have on any breathing apparatus or anything. And around the world, oil companies do this. They have an oil spill and a bunch of people come in to help because they want to protect their environment. They want to save the little bit of wildlife and stuff that they have left. 47,000 people went to help clean up the Deepwater Horizon. 11,000 people went to help Exxon. And you have 10% of them dying from strange bone cancers and stuff like that. And then you get $3,000 from these oil companies to say, you know, sorry, but this is all we're going to give you. That is not going to help you when you're trying to get treated for cancer, especially not in the Bahamas. So let's go away with that, right? Right now, I want us as Bahamians to pay attention. Pay attention to who is fighting for you and who is not saying anything. I have not seen the ministers of parliament for Andros, the Berry Islands, Grand Bahama. I have not seen them fighting against this tooth and nail. Yes, some of our ministers have come out and said that they do not support oil exploration or oil drilling. But if you have your leader saying that, yes, they're going to support oil drilling, they ain't on your side. That's me. That's my opinion as a Bahamian, as someone educated who has seen this, the environment, and I've seen what oil can do. So that's it for my presentation, but you can always find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, Dr. Anselino Davis at Science and Perspective.
I definitely know we were going to get everything that we needed to hear to work on a way to mobilize as many voices to really start taking action on this serious issue, because it's a serious issue. Bahamians are going to be affected by any oil drilling or oil spill or oil residue that's going to happen to our waters as well as to our islands, our little islands, 5,000 square miles, right? And so thank you for very direct comments. You mentioned that you are from the Bahamas, and I just wanted those who are from Curacao. We have Jim from Eleuthera. We have many different people. And so for those of you who are here with us, we thank you for your support. Dr. Davis never really uses any moment to not tell the truth. And I'm so happy that he was able to tell the truth today. Oil is a dirty and dangerous industry, and tourism is definitely not one, right?
right? We need those clean white beaches. Can you imagine someone? Oh yes, I want to go and sunbathe on an oil-covered beach. I want to eat oily crab and some oily conch. No, you never see it.
Right. And I definitely don't want my snapper to have no oil in it, neither the grouper. Right. So we definitely need to be working on some better legislation and permanent bans on oil drilling in our country, because these are the things that we thrive off of. And so I'm glad that you talked a little bit about the impacts of oil drilling to every Bahamian, as well as to the industries that Bahamian really benefit from. And so I want you to stay in the studio. We definitely have some comments for you for later on, but I really want to move on to Mr. Chris Wilkie, who could really bring that. You brought it from a Bahamian perspective. Bahamians working on the Deepwater Horizon spill. I'm bringing it home, but I want to take it out a little bit further. So I want to bring the Global Advocacy Manager for Waterkeeper Alliance, Mr. Chris Wilkie, onto the stage, who will give us a little global perspective on what oil drilling could really do for the Bahamas.
Or
can't.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Rashima. And I don't have a very long presentation because we still have one more person after me, so I'll try to go really quickly. But thank you to the previous speakers and all the dedication that people have provided to our islands, our future coalition. Waterkeeper Alliance is the global convening organization for all of our waterkeepers. And we actually have 350 active waterkeeper programs now around the world. We're in 48 countries, and our organization recruits, trains, organizes, and advocates for our waterkeepers. And Rashima and Waterkeepers Bahamas is one of those active programs. We have a very active advocacy campaign called Clean and Safe Energy, and it recognizes that fossil fuels are at the center of many of our water quality issues. In fact, as we heard today, fossil fuels are toxic along their entire life cycle. I don't even think you should call it a life cycle, but the term seems to work. But from extraction, pulling them out of the ground, to transporting them, risking spills, refining them, creating chemicals for plastic and everything, part of the refining process, there's pollution generated there. And then finally, at the point of combustion is where a lot of the problems really happen: air pollution, water pollution, and of course, carbon, climate change. And I don't know if you know this, but a pound of whether it's oil or coal or natural gas actually creates like 3 to 7 times that much carbon in the atmosphere, because it combines with oxygen. And so there's more carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere than the fuel itself actually weighs. So anyway, real quickly, I wanted to save time for our next speaker, Katarina. I just wanted to touch on 3 points. First of all, there's this exploratory drilling that happened near Key Sal. It apparently went without a major incident. We did not see a catastrophic oil spill that we were worried about on the level of Deepwater Horizon, but we don't really know because we haven't seen the reports yet. So this gets to that freedom of information. If we had a fully implemented Freedom of Information Act, we could request the drilling report and compliance report and look to see what went wrong. We know they didn't reach their intended depth. So did something go wrong that it did not allow them to reach that depth? Were there other impacts as a result of a mishap? We really don't know. We know there was a piece of metal went down the hole at one point and they had to drill around it. The other thing that we know is that very likely pollution did occur at that site. The plan that was submitted by BPC to the government of the Bahamas called for 80 tons of barite drilling fluid to be discharged onto the sea floor. This is a point that we raised early on in objection to this. It also contained 525 pounds of aldoside G, which is a biocide to keep, I guess, bacteria growth down in the drilling well. 220 pounds of oxygon, an oxygen scavenger. Sea life need oxygen. This is designed to remove it. Sour scav, 525 pounds, and 4,100 pounds of PAC-L, which is a lost circulation material. All those things are toxic to the marine environment. They were all indicated that they would be discharged to the seafloor, but the company did not mitigate for that. And we haven't yet seen an accounting of what was actually discharged. That was the first point that I wanted to make, is I don't think that just because there wasn't an oil spill that we dodged a bullet, because we do believe that harm did occur as a result of this drilling. The other thing is the Bahamas were at great risk, and I won't go long on this because Dr. Davis touched on it nicely. The spill plan was totally inadequate. It basically said they were going to fly helicopters with dispersant from Florida if they got an oil spill, and if anything reached the beaches, they were going to clean that up. There was no plan to scoop the oil off the surface of the water, which is really what's needed. And there was no funding or assets or a command structure in place. It was all going to be up to the oil company to do that work for us. And of course, they don't want to take responsibility in the middle of a disaster, so they're unlikely to. And we don't believe they had the financial assets. We don't know what insurance policies they had in place, but you can't be waiting for your insurance company to pay you so you can hire an oil spill contractor when there's an oil spill that's occurring. One thing that we know about oil spill is minutes count. You can't do this next week or in 2 weeks. You need to get on the water now and start containing it and start cleaning it up. And there just isn't the infrastructure. We would have had to beg for the U.S. to come in and essentially deploy assets, and then potentially have to pay those costs. And then thirdly, this is the point that I don't think is touched on much at all, is the climate impacts from this proposal are potentially huge. A lot of focus was on this one exploratory well. Well, why are we drilling an exploratory well? Well, BPC told us there was 700 million to 1.4 billion barrels of oil. What would it mean if we pumped this and send it out into the global market, into the global atmosphere? We're using a multiplier of 0.3 metric tons per barrel. That would have equaled over 300 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere. 300 million metric tons. That, and I did some calculations, that equals the carbon footprint over 20 years of 18 small Caribbean nations. I calculated all of those, including the Bahamas. 2.3 million people, all of their carbon footprint would have been doubled essentially by this one project. So there's one calculation I think people will need to realize when it comes to protecting against climate change is that the only safe thing to do with fossil fuels is to leave them in the ground. If they're left in the ground, they will never be part of the climate change problem. And once they're pumped out, someone's going to burn it eventually. So it's not just about individual choices, what kind of car you have, how long you run your air conditioning, how many airplane flights you take. It has a lot to do with the fossil fuels that are in the ground and whether or not we can leave them there. And that's all I have, Rashima. So if you want to turn it over.
Yes, thanks so much. Thanks, Chris, for joining me on stage. Just before I turn it over to our last presenter, thanks, Chris. I wanted to just give an update on some of the things that have been happening along with letters, along with the petition sign-in, along with a social media campaign. Waterkeepers Bahamas, along with Save the Bays, the Coalition to Protect Clifton Bay, were able to go before a judge and to have the proper approvals or rights in order to commence a legal proceedings or a judicial review. And Matt touched on it just a little bit, where he talked about freedom of information and having access to documents and reports and all of these other things that should be made available to the public as far as being aware. But we were not at that stage, and we're still not at that stage. And so the two groups were able to get the approval to commence a JR, or judicial review, in order to now put before the courts a case asking the courts to now make a decision on whether or not the government as well as BPC were in line with the procedures of the country, as well as the laws that are on the table in terms of having the licenses, the permits, whether or not they went through all of the proper government agencies in order to have proper permits in order to drill. And so that case is still ongoing, and there's a lot that we're not really able to update you on, but I want you to know that we're using every avenue to be able to have a proper decision made on oil drilling in this country. And as we are able to share more on that legal case, I want you to know that we will share that information with you as well. And I'm going to bring on the other female in the room, right? And so I definitely see her as an inspiration. She's a mentor to me, Ms. Kazarina McKinney-Lambert, who is the executive director for Reef. Everyone knows Reef in the Bahamas. She's done so much with inspiring young people, really being involved in policy development around environmental legislation and frameworks and programs. She's done a lot for the Bahamas. And so her contribution really means a lot. And so, Katharina, I want to bring you on. I know you have a lot to talk about, and I'm going to give you that time.
Great. Thank you so much, Rashima. It is a pleasure to be here tonight and to be working with you on this Our Islands, Our Future campaign. I am going to share my screen now. Can you see it? Oh, there we go. Great. So I am, as Rashima said, the executive director of Reef, the Bahamas Reef Environment Educational Foundation. Reef is a Bahamian non-governmental organization established in 1993. And our mission is to promote the conservation of the Bahamian marine environment that sustains our way of life. Reef is a member of the Our Islands, Our Future coalition, and happy to work to protect our waters and our lands from oil drilling. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the current issues that have come up during this campaign, and also to talk about next steps. We are incredibly grateful for this wide-ranging support that we've received. Close to 100,000 people signing the petition, and over 150 local and international businesses and organizations who have joined the coalition. We really do have an opportunity now to shape our future and to turn away from this option of dangerous and polluting oil drilling in favor of a climate resilient future that protects the environment around us and sustains lives and livelihoods. I'd like to talk a little bit about these topics, and I'm going to get through them quickly because I hope we have time for some more questions at the end. But clearly there are some deep concerns voiced by many Bahamians, especially those involved in tourism and fishing, that are dependent on a healthy marine environment and are not willing to risk it. This campaign has helped amplify those voices. And you've heard already this evening about important marine areas in the Bahamas. They're somewhat far away, but they are critically essential to the well-being of our country. The Kisal Bank, the Great Bahama Bank, where a lot of the fishing activity takes place, and the Andros Westside National Park, that are close to the site of the recent exploration well, Perseverance 1, that started in December and finished in February. So aside from the potential for a massive spill, and of course we all remember that Deepwater Horizon and the Ixtoc 1 disasters were both exploration wells. But aside from that, there's also the normal daily pollution that comes from offshore oil drilling. And you've heard already from our other esteemed speakers that we're really not in a position to deal with that. There's actually a massive industry in the Gulf of Mexico that's solely dedicated to cleaning up those everyday pollution and everyday spills from the established oil industry there. I'd like to talk a little bit about insurance. This is a picture of the Deepwater Horizon disaster that's still fresh in our minds. And thanks, Dr. Davis, for talking about this. But there has been considerable concern from our neighbors particularly Cuba to the south and the US. Florida and much of the Atlantic coast have already banned offshore oil drilling in their waters. And there's some serious implications from an insurance perspective for us in this. Thanks to the recent amendments to the Oil Pollution Act, it seems clear that BPC and ultimately the Bahamas could be held liable for an oil spill in Bahamian waters that impacts U.S. trust resources. This poses a huge financial risk for the Bahamas. So from the start of the campaign, we've been asking questions about insurance. Some of these questions remain unanswered today. We specifically were looking for information on the limits of coverage that BPC had for the drilling and information on what exclusions there might be. We have asked, but have yet to see a certificate of insurance for the drilling that took place. And given that there was at least a 9-year legal battle over the multi-billion-dollar cost of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, this is a very pertinent question that we should be asking and we should be getting an answer to. BPC stated that they had tourism and fisheries covered. We're trying to understand what that means. Covered how? Covered in what? They stated that they had more than the minimum insurance required by the Bahamian government, but we still don't yet know what that minimum is. This is one of the questions that we have asked through the Freedom of Information, and now that the country is moving towards that, we hope to get some more answers going forward. Despite initially stating that they had no record of underwriting these risks through the Lloyd's syndicates, Lloyd's of London did eventually admit that their syndicates were insuring the drilling in Bahamian waters. And this did catch the attention of a number of international campaigners who've already been putting pressure on Lloyd's not to insure new drilling in other pristine areas such as the Arctic. So up on the screen are 2 links to some of the global campaigns by some of us and Insure Our Future that are asking Lloyd's not to do this. I'd like to talk a little bit about license fees. I see a number of questions in the chat regarding that, and we're looking for clarity on this. These license fees still seem to be outstanding, license fees that are due to the Bahamas from BPC. According to their own website, $250,000 per block per year. That's since been removed from the website, but we have copies of it. And that would be $1.25 million per year. So that, as far as we can tell, still hasn't been settled. So yes, it seems completely unreasonable for BPC to be requesting a lease renewal without resolving this issue first. ESG, there really is a growing awareness. It's sort of skyrocketing and has changed dramatically in the past more than a decade since the first licenses were given to BPC, but a growing awareness of the negative impacts of oil drilling across a suite of environmental, social, and governance indicators. And Matt Aubrey spoke a little bit to this already. The incoming CEO of BPC recently stated that they are now developing an ESG document, so we do look forward to seeing that. But it's also worth looking at a number of other companies that are providing services to support the drilling and or critical funding that also have their own ESG commitments. So we do acknowledge and appreciate that one of the funders of BPC's Perseverance 1 well recognized that they made an investment decision that was not aligned with their commitment to sustainability and their strategic investment framework, and they took action to address it. So there's an opportunity for shareholders to hold the companies that they're invested in accountable to their own ESG commitments. Chris Wilkie talked a little bit about climate, and building a climate resilient future is becoming more and more of a priority around the world. And in particular, this is of the utmost importance for the Bahamas, as we are one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the damaging effects of climate change. Particularly when it comes to sea level rise, we are such a low-lying country, and we're also very vulnerable to increasingly strong hurricanes. Some of our own leading climate experts right here in the Bahamas have stated that allowing drilling in our waters really is drilling our own destruction. The Bahamas is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, and we have stated that we are not an oil drilling nation. Currently, 10% of the marine environment that is in our marine protected areas network has an estimated $5 billion per year in carbon sequestration value. There's a lot of interesting work going on here, and oil drilling would certainly be jeopardizing that. As a country, we're taking steps to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and better understand our emissions. And I must say that we are incredibly heartened by the support from around the world. The United States has rejoined the Paris Agreement and is prioritizing green jobs to combat climate change and support economic recovery. We really want to be doing this here. As we heard from Kieran Smith earlier, there are many more opportunities, new opportunities, and new jobs in the renewable energy sector. And in the lead up to COP26, the big climate conference that will be happening in November, countries around the world are strengthening their climate commitments. At the end of last year, the United Kingdom made the tremendous forward-thinking policy shift to completely end UK taxpayer support for overseas fossil fuel projects. This is huge, and we are certainly very appreciative of this step forward. So next steps. This really is an urgent matter. BPC has stated that they have applied for a 3-year renewal of their license that expires at the end of next month. It expires at the end of June 2021. It would have expired at the end of last year, but there were 2 force majeure extensions as a result of the state of emergency, the COVID state of emergency. They have gone so far as to claim that they have a right to renew their license, and this is something that we vehemently object to. Instead, we hope that the Bahamas will implement a ban on offshore oil drilling, and that we will steer clear of this going forward. Many other countries have done this. Certainly Florida and the East Coast of the United States has a ban on offshore oil drilling, and Belize also. And this is specifically to protect their economies and their environment. This is what we want to do here. So many of you have asked how you can help. And we encourage you, as Rashima mentioned, to share the Our Islands, Our Future updates with your contacts through social media. We're putting a lot of information out there, and if you can help us get the word out, that is incredibly helpful. Sign and share the petition. You can find it really easily at stopbahamasoildrilling.com. Sign some of the global petitions, and I will drop those links in some of the chats on Facebook and YouTube. And support your local organizations. There are many of the organizations are giving the environment and the people who depend on them a strong voice. There are opportunities for volunteering and donating, and we really appreciate you getting involved. And as Matt Olbrey said earlier, please do think about all sorts of ways of getting involved. Contact your elected officials regarding oil. Let them know your opinions. Encourage renewable energy. The prices are dramatically coming down, and this really is the way forward. And ask your elected officials regarding the implementation of that Freedom of Information Act. So please do get involved and stay involved for a sustainable future going forward. Now, turn it back to you, Rashima.
I want you to stay on the stage, though. If we could get a couple of those comments that have been coming in on social media channels. I know that we are a little bit over time, but just to wrap things up, I would like for everybody really to come back to the stage. Let's just have a roundtable discussion, because that was so much that we were able to hear, a lot that we were able to digest, and it was all worth it. One of the questions was, what can we do to stop BPC, Bahamas Petroleum Company? And so I hope that we were able to answer some of those questions in those last comments that Katharina has done. But it's really our government's really taking a stand for the people of the Bahamas and implementing that permanent ban on oil drilling, so that it's not only BPC or any other company coming in with a different name.
So I want to point out to all Bahamians that when you look at the election results for the last election, 700 Bahamians in any constituency could change the way the election goes. So write to your government representative, write to whoever say they want to represent you, and let them know that oil drilling is stupid and you want to see them say it publicly so that they are not taking any BPC money, so that they're not going to be standing for BPC in no backroom or nothing like that. But they need to say it publicly, especially if they're already sitting in the House of Assembly. They need to get up and use their 10 minutes to say that now, not promise to do that after you vote for them. You can't give someone 5 years on a promise.
I think to follow up with that, I think that that's a very powerful step forward. And I might even add to that. I think ask the question, ask what they think about these issues, and then ask what they're willing to be able to do about it. Folk come out big time on elections, but they do so to toss out people they're not happy with. That's powerful, but selecting the folks that will do what you want is even more powerful. So I think it's important to kind of use this opportunity also, not only just to promote what you think they should do, but find out how they're going to accomplish what they say they might.
Anybody else? I mean, these are powerful comments. But Deborah Deal, I mean, I really appreciate the comments that she's been putting in the chat, and I wanted to highlight this one in particular. So BPC hasn't paid on their licenses yet. Governments are considering extending their contract. Yet, if I don't pay my business license, government won't let me operate my business and can't keep a business account without producing the updated business license. I mean, it is all humorous, right? And that's something that we talked about. Kazarina mentioned that you have $1.25 million a year, right? And so we need answers on whether or not that money has been paid, how much of it has been paid, how many years are still owing, because they were already able to drill.
Yeah, and so for me, one of the biggest issues is in our Constitution. It says that any representative within government, any senator, they have to divulge any conflict of interest that they have. From what we've talked about tonight, and for what we all know, any minister that's involved in any voting on the floor of the House of Assembly, any decisions in the Senate that's related to Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, Tourism, Finance, or even Health and Safety, they cannot be involved in anything if they're also involved with BPC. And we have ministers who they have said that they just toeing the line with regards to the BPC deal, or we have senators who actually work for BPC. That don't make no kind of sense to me.
Yes, definitely. And I just wanted to go back on those powerful points that Matt said. We really need to be asking our politicians. We're moving into that election season, right? And so many of them are going to have very persuasive campaign toolkits. And so we really need to be asking them, how do you feel about oil drilling and what are you willing to do about it? And to not joke around it, because we're really looking beyond just the 5 terms. I mean, the 5-year term. We're looking at our children who will in 25 years be in the position of where we are right now. So we really need to be forward thinking in the future planning and development for this country. And so that's one of the reasons why what Kiron and Wani Luthra is doing is so important, and we need to move those efforts from just being on Eleuthera or quietly done in Andros and Abaco or Grand Bahama, and making that the national policy where we're really implementing renewable energy initiatives and projects.
Yeah, and I think I really like what you said, that we're future thinking instead. And so if you have some part of the Bahamas that you love, if you have some beach that you always go on, imagine that covered in oil, and go and get your community together, make it a protected area, make it a community area, however you need to do, publicize it, tell everyone how pretty it is and how at risk it is, and make sure that you get to protecting that now, because there's some corporation that's trying to buy that out, that's trying to rape and pillage those resources near there. And that deal is going on behind the scenes. This BPC deal, that was like 2007, 2010. That's an ancient deal. So we didn't even hear about that. And I think I wrote my first letter regarding it to the Tribune in 2011, but they still didn't say anything. They didn't do anything about it. So we need to start thinking ahead and get out in front of them.
Yep, definitely. So I have Kazarina, I have Chris. And any comments from you? I know we've been working hard since April last year on the Our Islands, Our Future campaign. And I know that it seemed as though, we weren't really, we were quietly working, and, sometimes it helps to hear from people that what we're doing is really reaching them. And so to see our petition at nearly 100,000 signatures, I mean, that really did a lot to motivate us, right? And to have Matt on stage with us from org, and Kiran from Money Luthra, Dr. Davis from Science and Perspective, we have the support, but in terms of really engaging people and getting people more involved, just tell them a little bit more about some of the things that we can do. Catherine, I know you touched on it. And of course, we want you to sign the petition, but there's so much more that we want you to do.
So yeah, thank you, Rashima. I think we want to keep this in the front headlines. We want to keep this on the news. If we hadn't been drawing attention to what was going on, to this drill that happened at the end of the year, it could have happened without anybody even realizing what was going on and realizing the impacts that were happening. So keeping it in the news, sharing this information, and pulling on different supporters from around the Bahamas and around the world. We've really appreciated people from the tourism fields standing up and speaking out about the risks to their livelihoods, particularly in tourism and fishing, and then pulling on supporters from outside the Bahamas as well. We've had a lot of great advice from different people who have been able to dig deep. You heard a little bit about the deep digging that was done into the environmental impact assessment. That had a lot of issues with it. We also dug into the economic side of it and saw that it was really a very poor deal for the Bahamas. But also looking at the legal side and recognizing that there are ramifications that go beyond the boundaries of the Bahamas. So pulling on whatever background and resources you have and using this to keep this campaign alive is really helpful. And thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. And I see some comments in the comment field about how to organize and get more involved. And supporting this coalition is really the best way that you can do that, is to help us amplify our message. It's very hard for a small upstart coalition to get the word out this quickly, but we've done a good job of getting in the national media and international media. And even just, sharing our posts, sharing that the petition with your networks, helping us get the word out there. You never know when the next person you give it to, they might give it to 10 people. So that's a really important thing. I would also like to arm everybody with just one final thought, because I think sometimes people think, well, gosh, I use oil in my life. I drive a car, or I ride a ferry boat, or whatever it is, and you really can't think of it in those terms. This oil that would be, if it was ever developed off of the coast of Andros, it's not for the Bahamas. This oil is never going to be refined in the Bahamas. It's never going to really even become part of the Bahamas economy. It's going to go off to a refinery in the U.S. It's just going to join the global petroleum market, just like Texas crude or Gulf of Mexico or wherever else. So this is not about energy security. It's not about those aspects. This is about stopping a very dangerous project that could forever change the Bahamas.
Yes, definitely. I'm so happy that we were able to talk about freedom of information a little bit more because, Matt, there are many Bahamians who aren't able to understand how they can use this as a tool to mobilize people and to mobilize their campaigns. And so we have one of our commenters who's really appreciative of your comments on that and us really tying it into our campaign. And so we have to keep the pressure on. We do know that we have a information commissioner that was recently appointed and a deputy commissioner as well, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. We wrote 2 letters to the Attorney General because there was no information commissioner at the time, requesting those drilling reports, requesting confirmations on insurances and other licenses that BPC had or did not pay. There was a lot that was going on that were unanswered. We'd still like answers to those questions. It has not gone away. We'd like to know what they are. We'd like to see those drilling reports. And
Well,
so
yeah.
I think it's really. Sorry.
yes,
Those letters.
I've been trying to talk and didn't realize that my mic was muted.
Oh.
So no, I do agree. I think this is a very important conversation. What I really appreciate about it is the educational aspect of it. I mean, one of the things, and I think one of the lessons we've learned is if persons are not paying attention to it, if they're not being educated about it in their communities, they don't think it would affect them. And as a result, I think, having these sessions and getting more organizations involved with the campaign is critical. We know we're in a crazy season now. This is the time for public participation and to put pressure. And I think this is a time where we have a policy window pretty much where we would be able to make some change based on the season if we have the right amount of people and the right pressure involved in the process. So I think we're in a good stage, and by getting more persons involved, I think you could really make some stuff happen.
Well, often we get asked, why would people care about something like freedom of information when so many people don't have jobs and people are in crisis and all the things that are going on? And I think this is a very direct application. If you love the beautiful water that we all enjoy and depend upon here, if you want your children to be able to enjoy that, here's a direct reason why we need to put pressure on making sure that the law like that is available so that when folks and groups like this are together, they can get that information. I also think it's important to point to build on is this group has momentum. And I think too often what we see is folks want to start their own group because it's this one thing. It's really important these days. There's the causes are not growing and neither are the funding sources. So joining a group that's already working together, find a space, what you can bring to it, I guarantee they can value. So definitely consider getting involved in something that's already moving forward versus starting your own and then putting your name on it. I think there's value to that, but I do think that again, there's a lot of opportunity to contribute and make a difference, and this is a great example of how that can happen in a very concrete way.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else with any closing remarks? Good. So I guess I'll see you all backstage. This was a very lively discussion on the future of oil drilling in the Bahamas. I want to thank all of my speakers for being here, for appreciating and respecting each other's presentation. It was all worth it. Yep, Chris, everyone. It was really good to have you here. There was no dull moment at all. You see behind me this lady, she's swimming in the waters of the Bahamas. I want her to be able to continue to do that. And I also want to be able to continue to do that. And that's not me, by the way. But thank you again. I just want to remind our viewers that you're able to contact us at any time. You can go to our website, ourislands.ourfuture.org. You can also send us an email. We're always accepting emails. Contact at ourislands.ourfuture.org. So we're definitely willing to hear more from you. We want to be able to mobilize the masses. Like Hebron said, it's crazy season. Let's use that opportunity to get as much information out there to get as much support out there. Let's grow it. We know that oil is dirty and dangerous. We definitely don't want that happening for us, for our children. We don't want no oily fish in our boiled fish. So thank you again. We'll end with a short video, but we hope to see you more in the future as we continue with these community meetings and engage in you as much as we can. Thank you for bearing with us, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Our rocks are exactly the same multi-billion prospects we've been talking about for a long time.
If there is an issue, and there always will be, this isn't like mowing the lawn.
This is a very high impact well.